Thank you so much, Miranda. It's my pleasure to welcome you for this little interview in which I'm hoping we're going to be able to talk about music, your career, your education, and some specific composers that I might have the luxury of asking about. Um, Miranda Cuckson is one of the most outstanding violinists of our time on the concert stage. Incredible dedication to promoting new music, to working with living composers. So it's a real treat for me to be having this chance of asking you some questions today. Thank you.
Oh, well, for me also. Thanks for doing this.
So let me start just breaking the ice, asking you about contemporary music and why this is so important to you. What is the role of music nowadays, and why specifically are you interested in promoting new works?
Yeah. Um, well, well, first of all, I think music is so important. I mean, it's of course such a big part of life and society in general. You know, there's always kind of some kinds of music around. It's obviously a very fundamental thing for humans in terms of yeah, how we express ourselves, how we move, how we do communal uh, things together. Um, so classical music is like a certain category of that in terms of like pieces that are for the most part written down or created in a definite sort of way. But I think I'm finding nowadays that it's particularly meaningful because there's such a tremendous glut of verbal communication through the internet, of course. Obviously, we've it's so always huge in terms of how we all communicate, but I feel like there's a constant stream and glut of words, and we're all like struggling to manipulate these words and give them meanings, and in some cases distort and change the meanings, and kind of using words as weapons or just as ways to get your own way and to say the world is a certain way. And I mean, that's fascinating, but it's also tremendously stressful and confusing. Um, but it's a part of life now that we have to try still to communicate that way. But I feel like music and some other nonverbal arts, I think, are still a way that even though they of course leave open certain range of interpretation, but they also get at some more like really universal things. And yeah, some of the nuances that are very hard to just like pin down in such a definite way and say this is how it is, you know. So for me, that's what and even when you get into something like contemporary classical music, which you think is not the most popular sort of type of music, but I think even with that, just the experience of listening and yeah, experiencing what different artists are doing is like a very kind of fundamental thing that kind of helps to navigate in some areas that it's very hard to with just language. So that's what I've been feeling lately, in a very current way. Um, um, on the whole, like in recent years, in terms of my involvement in contemporary music, I mean, I got very fascinated with it maybe 20 years ago or something, but you know, as I was finishing schooling and I mean, for me, it was a very organic thing. Like I was very steeped in all the core repertoire. That's really what I came from and the sort of musicians I studied with. But then I also had certain key teachers who were very involved in the new music of their time. And it just, for me, it was like I basically felt like, not that I know all the music that's there, but certainly in terms of violin music anyway, I knew a lot most of the repertoire, and I felt like, well, so what now? What else is there? What's been written since, you know, the early 1900s, going from there. And so to first to mid 20th century and then up to now. And it just sort of like kind of propelled me into just like getting up to date in terms of what is happening in the music. Yeah, and I think probably also personally, I have always had a certain, as much as I love being involved in all the older music and also, you know, visual art, all the old stuff and everything, but I definitely do have a certain kind of modern sensibility too. Some of the things I love are really, yeah, the newer styles and the things that are more innovative and intriguing that way. And so I think that's part of it also for me, is just that kind of, those things I'm drawn to.
Wonderful. I love hearing your train of thought. So I love just letting you think loudly, because it's wonderful to hear. There's so much I could grasp from what you said in terms of music being some kind of, sometimes a solace, sometimes an escape, sometimes a way of abstracting yourself and letting yourself flow, and with this experimental and very open mind that I think you have. So I enjoy seeing where you go. So the next question I wanted to ask you is related. It's about your work, your collaborations with living composers. You've been, you know, you've worked with many of our important living composers. So what are some of your fondest memories of working with them, including people like Georg Friedrich Haas, who has written a violin concerto for you that you've premiered? Any particular recollections with him and or others that you could say, oh yeah, by the way, when we did this, or working rehearsals, or going to their home and playing their music, anything that you find interesting to share?
Yeah. Well, of course, many experiences. And I mean, I think a lot of what I love with working with the composers now is, yeah, I mean, they're all people with their own personalities. So it's just so interesting. Both, I mean, having the chance, you know, we all kind of like puzzle over like, who was Beethoven or who was Bach, or, you know, and we can't know fully because they're not here, but it's like, I enjoy just getting to know them as people, and what does that show me about the music that they're creating. And just, you know, like when you're getting to know any person, all the little aspects of their personality as you get to spend time with them, it's then you relate that to their music. It's really wonderful. Yeah, it's Georg Friedrich Haas. Yeah, he wrote me this wonderful concerto a few years ago. I had met him, yeah, I've lost track, over 10 years ago now, in New York when he first came here. The group I was in played some of his music, and yeah, he's a fascinating person and artist. He's yeah, he's, you know, like, it's interesting with creators. Some people are very like, well, it's a kind of like introvert extrovert kind of thing. I think even for a composer who's not a performer, but still some of them are much more kind of outwardly engaged in their collaboration and their communicating, and some of them are just very yeah, lost in their in their minds and their own creative space, you know, mentally. Georg is definitely like that. He's a very kind and warm person, which I've seen also as he's gone around to work with various people. But when he's working, he's like tremendously absorbed and not very communicative in an outward way. So I feel like, yeah, and he's also very prolific, so he's just constantly working. So he's a bit kind of in his world there. So I would say actually the times when when he had written me the concerto, which was also, it was late to the deadline, I have to say.
As
So
it
it
tends
was
to
like,
happen.
yes, it often happens. So I didn't have much time. I went over to his apartment here in New York and played for him. And then he just kind of like spent some time just showing me certain things in the score, about how he had made the piece basically, and with his harmonies and this sort of thing. But it was sort of like a kind of, with him, I felt it was kind of like a precious time I had to actually, yeah, work one-on-one with him. But he's a certain kind, you know, and then, I don't know, I'm thinking, yeah. I mean, they're all different kinds of composer. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not having like particular stories.
No, no, but it's very interesting what you mentioned, and the fact of working with them, getting to know them as a person, going to their homes and seeing the kind of human interaction they have, and how that somehow influences or affects how you see their music, how you interpret them, because you associate the one thing is the public persona, and something else is when you actually meet somebody and get to know them, and that really makes you, I imagine, understand their music much better.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, it opens a lot of questions, you know, like, of course, you don't have to meet a composer to play them, even a living composer, right? To play their music. And of course, there's no laws saying, you know, this has to be played this certain way. You know, there's like, you can interpret it sometimes in a ways a composer didn't really imagine, and depending, sometimes they're pleasantly surprised and excited, and sometimes the composer is not. You know, they're kind of displeased with how that turned out. But so, I mean, those are all questions. But yeah, but just personally, I think just having that opportunity to know them is just always very, yeah, just very satisfying, and gives you a certain kind of inspiration about what they're doing, and also kind of like the why of what, you know, like, why are artists, why did they feel compelled to do this, or what impulse led them to do that particular piece. Not necessarily, oh, this happened in their life, so they wrote this, but just like, yeah, some understanding of that is always really.
It's the wonderful thing that we always wish, you know, when we're performing some other, you know, the typical dead white male composers, that we could ask them, like you said, I wish I could ask Beethoven or Bruckner or whoever it might be, and that's not possible. But this is one of the beautiful things and one of the luxuries of working with a living composer, that sometimes things also change on the spot. And if you're at his home or her home and trying something and they don't quite get convinced by what they wrote, and they might change it on the spot or tell you, you know, I'll revise this section. That's also part of the amazing thing about this collaborative process of composers and performers working closely.
Oh, for sure, for sure. It just all becomes such a malleable thing, you know, you're really in that. And of course, then that changes your whole sense of just music in general, right? Like,
so the next question is somewhat related, and this comes back to one piece that is very dear to you and to me, the Ligeti Violin Concerto, and our upcoming CD release for it, which, you know, I feel so fortunate, so grateful that, you know, when we had you as an artist in residence at UC Davis, and we played this piece live at a public performance a couple of years ago. And I never thought this was going to be released commercially, and neither did you, I think. And so it was a nice surprise when the label approached me and they asked me for some recordings, and this is one of the ones I said I really would like for this one, and they really liked it as well. So it's quite thrilling. So I wanted to ask you about this piece in particular, and you know, I don't think you've met Ligeti. I didn't get to meet him. He died in 2001, I think. But why is this piece important to you? What makes it stand out in the repertoire? What is precious about the Ligeti Violin Concerto to you?
yeah, yeah, I was so excited when you suggested the piece, that we do it, because I hadn't learned it at that point. And yeah, it's such an amazing, I mean, I'm a big fan of his work in general. But the piece is like, well, I think one thing I love with that piece and some of his other music, it's, to me, I'm often very like drawn to music that kind of has both this kind of folk music grounding and that material and that kind of soul in it, but then has so much incredible inventiveness and yeah, innovative things, or just with the craft of, you know, because he's making a piece. It's so it's like yeah, I mean, you know, going back to Bartok or whatever, you know, or even earlier, some of the composers that did that with folk material. But someone like him, it's like he came up with so many amazing things, just like texturally and formally and timbrally, using how he used the instruments. But it somehow has such a kind of like earthy soul to it. That I just love. And it's like so great on the violin, written for the violin, and it sort of like feels like you're exploring the instrument, and it's hard, but it's like also feels like he's really using the instrument really, really well.
And
so yeah,
jumping on this idea of you know, somehow I think you really appreciate multiculturalism and how you see his music as well, and the roots it has, and at the same time you've worked with so many different orchestras around the world and different composers. And I meant to ask you, I hope I didn't interrupt on the Ligeti, and you're welcome to continue it, but I want to ask you because of this, and it really strikes me that your background is very, very diverse as well. I think in the places you've grown up and where your family comes from, are you interested in sharing a little bit about that and how that influenced who you are as an artist?
Yeah, sure. It's definitely a major thing about yeah, my life. Yeah, I'm very mixed. My father is a combination of Austrian and English. My mother's from Taiwan. But that's also kind of like a bit of the surface description, because so my grandfather was Jewish. He was Jewish. He was from Vienna, and he was forced to escape during the Holocaust and World War. And so he made his way eventually to England, which was where he met my English grandmother. And then, yeah, and then my dad was born in Wales because they had to leave London because of the Blitz and all this, you know, wartime stuff. And so when he was 7 years old, the family moved to Australia because they were welcoming immigration at the time and giving cheap deals on land to encourage immigration. It's very different from now, the situation there. But so my dad grew up sort of Australian also, and I was born in Australia, and our family's still there, his side of the family, his two sisters and my cousins. And then my mother's Taiwanese. She was born right at the end of the 50-year Japanese occupation of Taiwan. So the culture is also kind of very mixed, actually, sort of Japanese, Chinese, indigenous, Taiwanese kind of.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to these things. And then, but I've lived in the US since I was a baby. I was born in Australia, but my parents were living here in the States, so they brought me right back. And I was actually a British citizen when I was born. It's all complicated. But I became American with my parents when I was 11. So I've been American most of my life. And so that's a background, but I think, I mean, of course, you know, there are a lot of people of mixed heritages, and more than some people realize themselves until they dig into it. But I think for me, yeah, the more I've kind of thought about it, I think it just has really, yeah, given me a sense of like not seeing the world from one perspective, which I think is the great advantage of that. Like if you're all one thing and you're from one place, then you see the world from that, or that's what you'll naturally do anyway. And so I'm always kind of like shifting my vantage point, you know, and it's one of the, I think, the danger. I mean, I'm very, very proud of being an American in terms of what America has meant to me, is the ideas that this country was founded on and hopefully will hold on to. So I'm proud of that, but you know, there's a danger of like, if you just think that, well, yeah, we're the best and everything else is in reference to us, and you know, and that has to do with racial, white supremacy and all these things, like everything's in relation to that. It's interesting for me, like being half Asian also, which is exoticized a lot, you know, certain cultures, and sometimes meant very positively, but it's sort of like, well, if you're Asian, then you're looking at, that's normal, and you're looking out in the world, and you know, that yeah, other people are the other, you know. But anyway, I think it's also, my tendency is like, in terms of being an interpreter, has a lot to do with kind of, yeah, being really interested in understanding other people's points of view and what they want to express. So I think that has a lot to do with why I like to do what I do. It's just like exploring a lot of different people's artistic expression and seeing how I can understand that and help to express that.
That is Thank you for sharing
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And so the next question is somewhat related to the idea of your work with or about certain composers, and I know that you've been a great advocate of the works of Luigi Nono as well. So, anything you would like to say about his music and why you felt so close to it?
Yeah, I've been working on his music, and mostly this one piece, La Lontananza, but also a few others, for, yeah, about 10 years now. But it just continues to fascinate me. Well, I think it's a combination of a few things. One is, which is interesting for now also, is that he was someone who truly really combined all of his political message and his textual ideas in his works. Like, it's interesting now, I'm saying, partly because multimedia is a tremendous thing in the arts, increasing, I think, also because of the internet and video and all this kind of thing. And then also because there's so much political messaging going on. So he's kind of like a granddaddy for this this
Right.
kind of thing, I think.
He seems to be really ahead of his time with conveying a message.
Yeah, it was very kind of new. I think other people who were doing that were, I think a lot of things felt a bit more like sort of superimposed, like, here's a piece of music, let's stick a text, like something on it. But he really kind of, you know, he created these kind of more theatrical pieces, using space a lot, and electronics and all this. So that has fascinated me. There's also with him this combination of old and new. It's a bit like what I was saying. You know, he was from Venice. He had a real grounding in all the Renaissance polyphony of where he was from, and he that's what he started with studying. And it's, yeah, just that history in his music, it's there always. But then on the other hand, he was so he was really exploring sonically just different sounds and different aims in his sound. Like he was often going for something that was very, very fragile. You know, like as players, we learn our training to be super consistent with our tone and yeah, to be able to like draw a nice like even sound or rich sound or whatever. And he was like really basically just seeing what else he could explore for totally different expressive aim. So as someone who's like likes doing more experimental things, it really drew me. So yeah.
There seems to be a sense of freedom with his sound world, and he's got somehow no fear of trying and sometimes leaving for that emptiness or vastness. Like you said, he works a lot with space or pieces specifically written for the one you know, space. Like I know his relationship with Enzo Piano, the architect who designed like the Prometeo stage where the piece was premiered, and all these incredible things of somebody really giving. He had a mind of the future.
Yeah, well, definitely. I still find it so inspiring. And then there's a book recently done of his writings. They edited Vignero Rizardi and someone else. They it's just such a great volume. I just find it so inspiring for now.
Cool. So the next thing I want to ask you about is your education, how you started with music, and I know that you've gone to, you know, some of the greatest music schools in the world, and what were some of your most inspiring, most important mentors during your time as a student?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate to have had some wonderful mentors and teachers. Well, I did all my sort of more formal music schooling at Juilliard. I was there quite a long time. So I started it when I was 9 in pre-college. And then, yeah, and then I continued right then onto my undergrad. So I was there from 9 to 21. And then I left school for a number of years, and then actually went back because I was, at that point, I was eager to work with Robert Mann, who was the founding violinist of the Juilliard Quartet. And I kind of wanted to just like go play for him, have a few lessons, and called him on the phone. And he was like, "We have to come to school. I don't teach privately." And, you know, so I thought about it. And I was like, well, I don't have a master's yet. So 2 years, you know, maybe I should do that. So I went to study with him. And then I loved it so much, I went and did my doctorate. So I was there a lot. But anyway, he was a major figure for me. Robert Mann, he's one of the more recent one, but he was, as an artist, yeah, it's hard to sum up, you know, but he was just such an amazing imaginative musician, and had such tremendous, you know, he had I think 52-year performing career with the Juilliard Quartet, and he was just retired from the quartet when I went to work with him. But he had both like the performer's kind of like outward sort of rapport with an audience and how to communicate with people, but he also had that just tremendous like depth and kind of meditative sort of like, you know, he would often say like, when he was young, he would go and like, he was from Oregon, and he would go and like sit and watch the ocean by himself for hours. Wow. And he said that's what taught him so much about music. It's like just like experiencing nature by himself. I think he had that kind of like centered kind of like inside of himself kind of thing. It's just tremendously inspiring, and he was just an amazing person. And he's also someone really totally connected the old and the new, just like all one long thing, you know. So there's him. When I was, those years when I was not in school, I did some work with Felix Gallimir, who was an Austrian violin, also quartet player, actually, the Gallimir Quartet. He was someone who had worked with Berg and with Ravel, and
wow.
Yeah, so a real kind of link to that history, and also just a wonderfully imaginative, sensitive music. He just lived for music too. He was one of the most like idealistic artists I've known. Like it's just you live for music, whether you have a big audience or not, or you have the acclaim for it or not, or it was just, and it's important also in the world we live in. It's so like about your commercial success, or all these kinds of things you feel like you have to strive for. But he was so moving and inspiring that way. So I always hold on to him as that kind of artist, yeah, and there were others. I also studied with Dorothy DeLay for 8 years, high school and my undergrad. And she was an amazing, amazing teacher. I mean, she had great renown for that. She really was, as a violin teacher, she just had an amazing mind for taking apart the technique in the instrument. And yeah, and then she was also, she was from Kansas, I think. She was very, very American, very, very practical. So it was an interesting point of view. I think it's like, what do you need to do to like get your ideas across, and what tools can you develop so that you can, it was sort of all very,
it seems very contrasting to your other teachers.
Tremendously. That I feel lucky in that way. Like I had all these different people to learn from.
But such different viewpoints to assimilate.
Yeah, completely different. So
cool. So I wanted to ask you also about your experience. You've played with ensembles and as a soloist with orchestras and with festivals all around the world. So maybe you can share one or two of those select experiences that you have found very inspiring from a performer's perspective. Any fun memories, anything you'd like to share?
Oh, gosh. Well, yeah, I mean, I love going to different places to experience how the audiences are. I mean, this kind of, it's a cultural thing. And yeah, how do people experience music in a hall? It's always really, yeah, moving and interesting. And I don't know, I guess a couple recent things, like was that last year? I've lost track of the time. 1 or 2 years ago. I played at a festival in Holland. I did a solo concert, new music. And this was in Utrecht, and it was like quite a modern hall that I played in. And I sort of saw people filing in, but then they darkened the hall like a lot. So it was just light on this, bright light on the stage, and then very dark. So I couldn't really, see what was going on. I knew people had come in and everything. Yeah, they were so quiet. Wow. And yeah, and I almost started to feel like, yeah, like, is this getting across? Like, is somebody enjoying, you have this, like, so they were so still. And but then I finished a piece, and suddenly like this big whoop, cheers and stuff. And it was like, it was yeah, it was a nice experience. It's like, oh yeah, there are people here, and they're there was a great response right at the end, but they were so quiet and they're listening. It was
Wow, it was a different, very different experience
I mean, it's great. You're listening.
from your performer's perspective. It was so quiet that it made it so incredibly different from anywhere else, pretty much.
Yeah, it was like really notably, and I was playing some quiet pieces too, which I think had to do with it, that they were actually listening. You know, there was some
Savino or
yeah, I don't think I did Sharino, but I did, you know, that kind of with some techniques that are very, very breathy and whispery, and they were really listening. So that was, yeah, that was nice. And then another thing I contrasting is I went to Mexico City, also last year, and yeah, played a concerto by Marcela Rodriguez, who's from there. Yeah, and you know, this Latin American kind of embrace of music, you know. Yeah, it's just the warmth in the hall and this kind of like festive feeling that it's just in the hall the whole time. And yeah, wonderful response. And yeah, and I remember like she took, I don't know, she was sitting far back. She took quite a long time we couldn't even see her out there afterward, you know, we're trying to bring her up to stage. And then she took a long time and we didn't know where she was. And the audience just kept, you know, kept the applause going. We're all waiting, you know, it was just,
wow.
yeah, it's I mean, I always love that, the South American, Latin American kind of.
How beautiful.
Yeah. The way they enjoy music, you know, it's great. But it's all kinds. Yeah.
Cool. So that brings me to the penultimate question. I have a couple more left. So
Okay.
next one has to do, and you hinted at this briefly in one of your responses recently, the pandemic and how it's affected you and what has been your main source of inspiration during this difficult time for us musicians.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I've been right here a lot. Yeah, I think I mean the good part of it has been yeah, being able to focus and I mean as a player just to have that kind of continuous stretch of time to work, because when you're running around performing, that's the thing you're always struggling to find. And I'm sometimes better about than others about, you know, in controlling my own workload and my own schedule. I'm always trying to get better at that, but so I've enjoyed that aspect of being able to work on, like right now, actually, I don't have anything really to perform for a while, but I have some things for later in the spring and some quite challenging music. So it's actually great to be able to work and think without a lot of clutter in your mind about, I have to get here, I have to be there, or whatever. But yeah, I mean, earlier in this pandemic time, I did some videos. I wasn't at it right away. I had some friends who I think they felt like such an urgent need to have an outlet, and so just kind of putting out a lot of videos and stuff, which I mean, I think it's nice if you want to do that, and just share, you know. But I started doing some things. I was also fortunate in the summer to have a few small but actual performances to do, which was just wonderful. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of been a balance of, I've been inspired by what some people are doing creatively in terms of using the limitations of yeah, what we're dealing with now and the technology. one thing is I hope that once we come through all this time, that I think some of these things like this Zoom and the live streaming of concerts, I hope won't be jettisoned entirely, because I think it has been great for giving a lot of people access to experiences they just wouldn't be able to get to.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think it's shown us some things like that have been good. Yeah.
Thank you. So I've come to the end, the very final question, which has to do with maybe some advice that you might have for young musicians, for aspiring musicians, violinists, and how does one get better every day? What advice would you give?
To get better? Yeah. Well, I think I think it's important to stay in touch with your feelings about why you're doing things, and not to let things turn into just an obligation. Which, you know, in the busyness of life, it can feel like, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, or people are expecting me to do this. But to stay connected to why you wanted to be doing what you're doing, and or even if that's shifting, like just keep exploring what that means to you. And as a violinist, I'd say like both sort of keep maintaining what what you've built up as a player, but also like always be open to exploring alternatives. And also this is sometimes also something I tell my students sometimes too, because even though I'm like, I have a tremendous amount of training, like from Dorothy DeLay and various people, and studying a lot of violinists, and so I know how all that works. But I feel like it's also important to figure out what's working best for you, physically, and or what is you're drawn to explore, and even in your technique and everything. And that's what ultimately gives you your unique thing, which is not always because you know, there's certain instruments like violin has like certain ideals and certain styles that are very established as like, this is an ideal of violin playing, and there are a lot of great practitioners of it. But I think it's not that you have to throw that away in any way, but just like finding what is your own way with the instrument is and where that leads you explicitly. Also, I think it's worthwhile, and also makes it like continually, rather than you're just kind of repeating like, oh, I need to keep doing this way really well. It's okay. Yeah. Where are you going to go with that? Yeah.
Really helpful advice. So I want to thank you for your time, your generosity, your openness. You've been just so frank about everything, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you. So thank you so much, Miranda.
Oh, thank you, Christian. Thank you for doing this. Great to talk with you. I'm so excited about our recording also.
Me too. I look forward to that happening in just a few months. So thanks again, and all the best to you.
You too.